I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. Last week, Mauricio Pochettino named his 27-player training camp roster ahead of the June friendlies against Turkey and Switzerland. We expect that roster to be very similar to the final Gold Cup roster, which is due to Concacaf on June 4th. On today's show, we're going to break down the list of players that Poch selected, and to help me do that, Kyle Bond from the Sporting News is back. So, Kyle, it's been almost a week now since we took our first look at the roster. What was your biggest takeaway, when you saw it for the first time, and then after you listened to Poch kind of talk about it in the press conference right after?
Yeah, the biggest takeaway, I think, is the same as it is for everybody, or most people, I would think, is that there's a significant lack of European players. Now, Pochettino wanted to spin that in his press conference as, hey, we're giving other guys chances to step up. I think what he's trying to do is push this narrative that there's competition for these places. I don't know if I fully buy that, but that's more of a personal opinion than it is, anything that he's said publicly. But there is clearly an effort to either give guys a chance to compete for positions or rest players who have had long European seasons, or a combination of both. I tend to think it's more of the latter, especially considering that the most notable players who are not on the roster, which would be Christian Pulisic and Yunus Musa, the Federation came out and said that both of those players' absences were at least initiated by the players themselves. So that's why I don't fully buy the idea that this is some, broad push or grand gesture by Mauricio Pochettino to give guys, a chance to compete for places. I think it's more of these players wanted a rest. The Federation conceded to their requests. But there is clearly a lack of European talent on this roster. The players who are on the roster from Europe are players who largely have not had a number of chances over the past year to play for the national team, whether that be because of injury, form, competition for places, whatever it may be. So they need time to get involved. But that's my biggest takeaway, clearly, is that the lack of European talent on here is stark.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about Pulisic for a little bit, because I think, he did generate, him not being on this roster generated a lot of news and debate. And I thought it was interesting how it all played out. I think it was 1 or 2 days before the roster release, it kind of came out on social media that Pulisic wasn't going to be there. There wasn't a whole, that this was just reporters kind of reporting that from some sources they had. Then, I don't know if it was the day of or the day before, Matt Crocker, sporting director, put out that statement basically saying that Pulisic and his team had approached U.S. Soccer asking for the break, and after discussing, they gave it to him. And so I thought that was really interesting, is that they wanted it. It was like U.S. Soccer really wanted it to be known that this wasn't Pochettino saying, I need to give him a break, that it was Pulisic asking for it. And I don't know, it felt a little bit to me like they were kind of throwing him under the bus a little bit there. I mean, what'd you think about that whole announcement?
Yeah, so I wrote an article right after the news came out that basically said, hey, Poch is clearly not learning from the mistakes of past U.S. national team coaches. In my mind, I looked back at the last 3 World Cup cycles, and I said there has been a consistent lack of chemistry issue, either in the lead up to the World Cup or in the World Cup itself, which has hampered the ability for this group in particular, but also previous squads, to perform at these major international tournaments. There has been a consistent approach where There's been experimentation all the way up until the World Cup, and then the World Cup comes, and we go, oh no, why can't these players perform at the same level for the national team than they do for their clubs? What's wrong? And to me, it's clear what's wrong. It's that these players don't get enough time on the field together. I wrote an article that said Mauricio Pochettino needs to learn from these past mistakes. He's not doing that. It's a major drawback. I'm not saying that led directly to this statement, but I think the general noise to which that article contributed to forced them to say, look, this wasn't our decision. I still stand by what I wrote. At the end of the day, Mauricio Pochettino is the head coach. He makes the decision. It is his decision to acquiesce to Christian Pulisic's request. And Yunus Musa and whoever else asked not. I mean, you've got no Cameron Carter-Vickers, no Austin Trusty. There's a lot of guys from Europe who aren't here. Anthony Robinson, although Jedi, I think gets a pass because he's dealing with an injury issue that we've known about for months, right? There was a report that came out that said Christian Pulisic had an injury, which seems nonsense to me. Very convenient timing.
I think he went. I don't think he went the full 90 minutes over the weekend, but he started and went deep into that match. Yeah.
He started each of the last 11 league games for AC Milan, many of which they were either long shot to make Europe or out of it entirely. But anyways, point being here, long-winded point, that I think the Federation wanted it known to ease the pressure on the Federation. To me, that was a non-factor. Mauricio Pochettino has the final say. He could have said, no, we need you here. We want you to be here, and forced Christian to either play or reject a call-up, I think, which would have been significant. Maybe Mauricio didn't want to put him in that position, which I understand. But all these decisions have consequences. It was weird to see them acknowledge that publicly. I completely agree.
Yeah. And I don't think Pulisic has responded, to it, but I just wonder if that irritated, him at all, if he thought they had kind of come to some agreement and they would both get behind it, and support it. But you don't know. Maybe that'll come out, later.
Poch may have said, look, we want you to be here. We will agree, or we will come to the table with your decision, but the people are going to know that it was your decision. That may have been said, true, right, between them. But it was odd that it came out after the reports, right? You would think that if they really wanted this to be a team or collective decision, they put that out publicly before it gets reported, right? Rather than appearing to be a reaction to the reports.
Yeah, it did seem like, people were starting to get pissed off when they kind of heard the reports about him not being there, and they reacted to that and were like, hey, hold on a second. we want to take some heat off of us. You mentioned some of these other guys, that are missing, and I found it interesting that a lot of the people missing were directly addressed in the press conference. So I just want to run down the list here.
Yes and no, but let's go through it.
Okay. So, Pulisic, obviously we just talked about his team asked for the break. Anthony Robinson, injury concerns. I mean, they didn't come right out and say it, and a lot of it, I think it was in Spanish when he was talking about it, but it was basically he's had these things, he's seeing doctors, he's trying to figure out a plan.
He actually did address that in English. He did say exactly that. He said Anthony's barely trained for the last few months.
Okay.
I think his words were that, he hasn't trained much. He's only played games for Fulham. He doesn't actually train a lot, and that he's seeing, I think he said, multiple specialists. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think he at least hinted to the fact that he's seen multiple doctors and they still don't know what the issue is. So That's why I say Jedi gets a pass. This is a thing that we've known for a while about and seems to be relatively problematic for him.
Exactly. And we know he's missed time in previous camps, because of the same issue. So then you had Yunus Musa, who requested, it sounds like just a few days before the roster was due, to be left off to withdraw due to personal reasons. You have McKennie, Weah, and Reyna, who I don't know if he directly addressed in the press conference, but he's been pretty consistent over the last couple months that because of the Club World Cup, he wasn't going to call them, and they weren't even on the provisional roster. So, we knew they weren't going to be there. Yet Alex Zendejas, who was left off, and he kind of addressed that they have that Club World Cup play-in game, I think, on June 1st. And so if they win that, they're going to be in the Club World Cup. Yeah, and then, but everyone else, so there's a lot of other guys, Scally, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Austin Trusty, Tanner Tessman, Josh Sargent, some of the more notable ones. He kind of just said these were football decisions. What's your take from that? I mean, these are some guys that have been in pretty regularly, and he's saying nothing's wrong with these guys. They weren't given a break, no injuries. These are football reasons. Other players beat them out. We wanted to see other players.
Baffling, Frank. Baffling. This is the part where I was like, look, you've got to get your best guys in now. This is the chemistry that if they, look like they don't know how to play together, when the World Cup comes around, you're going to look back at this particular decision and you're going to say, messed up big time. And I mean, those names, first of all, Zendejas to me seems likely to be added if they don't make the Club World Cup. To me, that seems like a Club World Cup decision. He's in too good a form. He's playing in North America. It makes too much sense. I expect him to be added if they don't make the Club World Cup. The other guys you mentioned make no sense. Carter Vickers and Trusty, clearly two of the top center backs in this squad. Trusty especially would be, to me, a guy that hasn't played much under Pochettino. Pochettino would want to see, right? He fits the experimentation bill a little bit, even though by way of the stature of the club he plays for, he's probably already up the depth chart. It would make more sense for me to see him involved. Carter Vickers has been a guy that, while playing well for his club now, has been a mixed bag with the U.S. national team. So, like, I don't agree with it, but I at least get it. Like, it's a defensible decision. Sargent to me is frustrating as heck. I know a lot of U.S. fans are frustrated by his U.S. national team performances, but in reality, I think I saw something that he's had like 4 appearances since 2023. Like, the guy just hasn't had a chance. Like, he hasn't been given a chance. He was in the last camp and Pochettino refused to bring him on in a spot. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. He hasn't had a chance to play for the national team. The guy made the championship team of the season for this past year, including in a season where he missed significant time due to injury. Still made the championship team of the season. He's in incredible club form. He deserves a chance. He has not been given a reasonable chance to perform in the U.S. national team level, even though I know his past performances have been frustrating. The guy's got to get a shot. He's had 60 minutes. He got 1 start recently, and yes, he missed a chance or 2. Give the guy a shot. Tessman is, to me, the most baffling of all the decisions, because this is a guy that Pochettino has brought into the mix specifically, who clearly we saw in the last few camps Pochettino has preferred in midfield. And the midfield, you're missing Musa. Adams is only recently back. Maybe they want to be careful with him. I guess they'll just let him go. The midfield's incredibly thin. To me, that one makes no sense, from a logical standpoint, but also from a Pochettino standpoint. And I listed, when I asked Pochettino the question about, preferring MLS guys to Europe club players, I mentioned all of these guys in my question, and he didn't respond to any of them specifically. So he sort of said he said Sargent was a football
reasons, or yeah.
So I don't get it, man. It doesn't what are we doing? He keeps saying, "Oh, well, we have a year. We have a year. We have a year." You don't. That's not how this works. That's how it works on the club level. Sure, a year is an eternity at the club level. At the national team level, it's a blink of an eye. And I think that's been the most difficult transition for him from the club level to the national team level, is the calendar, the clock does not work the same. You do not have this time. And he said his response to my question, which was the most baffling part of the entire press conference, this was earlier in the press. It was not to my question, earlier in the press conference. it made me cringe, Frank, was he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but I put the exact quote on my Twitter. He said, time together is overrated. And I
was shocked when I heard that. I was kind of like, whoa.
This is a thing that club managers complain about. Like, you have the guys day in and day out. And Ruben Amorim at Manchester United has complained for like 8 months that he doesn't have enough time with the players. And you're going to sit here as a national team manager when you get these guys once every 2 months that it's overrated that you play together. Like, what? Baffling. Yeah. So we'll see. And this is a situation to me where it's like, hey, the guy gets the benefit of the doubt until he fails. But it feels like they're asking for it is I think the best way to put it.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, we talked about after the Nations League Final Four that, the honeymoon was over. I know you wrote a piece on that. But this Gold Cup, I think, if things don't go well, we're past the honeymoon is over point. Now we're to the point of like, I don't know what, I still don't think that Poch is going to get like fired pretty much no matter what because of his reputation. But we're to the point where people are going to really start to get a little bit like angry, and he's going to be under serious pressure, from the fans.
And here's what I want people to understand before we move on, Frank, is like, I got a lot of pushback on Twitter when I put my piece out there about Pulisic and the decision to leave him and others aside and chemistry and all that stuff. People are like, oh, he just played a long season for AC Milan. They were pushing for a European place, which is fair. You want him to then, play, who cares about, it's the Gold Cup. Who cares about that? It's not about the Gold Cup. It wasn't about the Nations League. Nobody cares about those titles in a vacuum, really. National team fans don't anymore care about the Gold Cup, really. They don't care about the Nations League, really. It's not about that. The performances in these windows are about the World Cup. They just lost to Panama and Canada. No one's mad that they didn't win the Nations League. They're mad that they lost to Panama and Canada in a competitive environment because it's a future indicator of potential failure. That's what it's about. It's not about the Gold Cup. This is about the World Cup. It's always been about the World Cup, and it's going to be about the World Cup until next summer comes. That's what it's about. If anybody's going to sit here and say, oh, you really expect Christian Pulisic to risk his time at AC Milan for the Gold Cup? It ain't about the Gold Cup. If you think it's about the Gold Cup, you're sorely mistaken. No one here cares whether they win the Gold Cup or not. People here want to see an indicator of future success at the World Cup, and losing to Panama and Canada ain't it. And flopping at the Gold Cup ain't it. It's about the World Cup, and it will be about the World Cup until next summer comes. So I don't want to hear anyone come at me and go, Christian Pulisic, people at AC Milan are gonna be mad that Pulisic is playing in the Gold Cup. That's just the wrong lens. And I'm very emphatic about that because I don't think anyone listening to this podcast really cares that much about winning the Gold Cup in a vacuum. It's about the World Cup and indicating future success. And the way it's looking right now does not indicate future success. And I think that's what has most people frustrated and or worried about.
Yeah, for me, it's a winning mentality, which goes, I think, to what you're saying, is that all of this is preparation for the World Cup, but it's it's now. You know what I mean? Starting that winning mentality now is part of it. It's not going to just, you're not going to just flip on a light switch a few months and be like, okay, this is we're actually in training right now for the World Cup, and developing. We have a losing mentality, right? The team is in a losing environment right now where they're used to losing. And so, yeah, that's what is kind of bothering me. And I thought when Berhalter was fired and you look at the statements that Crocker put out in terms of why he was it's time to win now. We've been talking about developing these players. These players are young. All of that. Put that behind you. It's time to win now. But now
it seems treating it like a Gold Cup.
Well,
like it's a Gold Cup.
It's a tryout.
Right.
Poch keeps talking about it being a project now. You know what I mean? When he first came in, he brought in all of the same players that have always been brought in, and I kind of thought, okay, he's just going to take the time he has with these players and try to make it the best they can. But now it's a tryout. He hasn't decided which players he wants to bring. He's still trying out players, and so it's like he's building a project. And my concern is that there's not going to be enough time to develop kind of like a winning atmosphere ahead of the Gold Cup.
And the biggest criticism of the previous regime, right, with Greg Berhalter was that he was too soft with the players. He was too friendly with the players liked him too much. Now, I think that's a bit of a stretch. Like, the players should like the manager. That's important. But I think the overall point is that he allowed the team to relax and become, I guess, complacent and not prioritize each moment you put on that shirt. And I think it's important that you look at this Christian Pulisic decision not as a Pulisic decision. Pochettino is in charge. If he wanted Pulisic to be here bad enough, Pulisic would be here. And he's the guy that makes these decisions. If he wants to go turn around and go, okay, Christian, you can have the summer off, that falls at his feet, not Christian's. Like, yeah, it's not great that the captain of the U.S. national team doesn't want to be there. That's its own thing. But Pochettino makes this call at the end of the day. If he wants to put Christian on the spot and go, accept or reject this call up, but you're getting called up, then that's what he would have done. And at the end of the day, it's his call. And if it's not his call, that's a bigger issue. But it's his call, and for our purposes. And that is important.
Yeah, I wonder if he's being ruthless enough in this role, but we'll see. But I want to talk about one more thing regarding the press conference, because it was the question that you asked him at the press conference, which was near the end, that I thought led to the most interesting part of the whole press conference. You asked him a question. I think about players. I don't even remember the exact question because he kind of just took it and went in another direction. And you could almost see him after being, really polished and saying the right things during the whole entire press conference. There came a moment where it's almost like he started answering your question. It was like he kind of threw his pen down, sat back, and you could tell he was about to kind of just give a little speech. And he eventually got to the quote that about the players and how they behave in camp, and he says, if you arrive to the camp and you want to spend nice time, play golf, go for a dinner, visit my family, visit my friend, that is the culture we want to create. No. And the very first people I thought of when he said that was Pulisic and like McKennie, because you always see pictures of them playing golf at training camps or when they're together on social media and whatnot. So what did you take from his comments there?
It was funny because this was not what I was intending on asking, right? Like this wasn't the point of my question. And I think it ended up great. I'm glad that he spoke on it like this, but I was hoping that he would address the individuals that I mentioned in the question. And I probably threw too many names at him for him to like address each one specifically. But man, he took it and ran with it. It just felt a little rich to me because I get what he's saying, right? We want these players to be focused. And I wish if he was going to make that point, he would at least back it up somehow with like, I know he doesn't want to throw specific guys under the bus and like, create a media firestorm, which probably would have happened if he had given specifics, but it almost feels empty without that. And, like, okay, you're going to sit here and like hint at some of this stuff, especially Rich, when this guy coached a charity match in February with a bunch of YouTube influencers. I think like I Show Speed was there or something like that, and a couple other guys. Like, he was like, you're doing this, you know, like if you're going to call these guys out for having these like joy rides during international breaks, you know, this thing wasn't during an international break, but the optics are still really rough on that. If you're going to then turn around and say we left a bunch of really important players out of this really important window because it feels like they're being complacent, I don't like it. I don't like it. It felt a little hypocritical and a little empty. And if that's the message he wants to send, I wish that he would send it harder. Because it feels vague and empty and a little bit easy, I guess, is the way I want to put it, when you leave it vague like that. So maybe the message was sent and that our feelings of it don't really matter, right? Like how the players receive it is the important part. But I don't know if the fan base received that well. And he paired it with like a bunch of other vague excuses where he never really leaned into one, right? If you want to lean into the fact that these guys are being complacent, go with that. If you want to lean into the fact that these other players have earned the chance to compete, go with that. If you want to lean into the idea that these guys from Europe deserve rest for the summer, go with that. But when you put all three of them together, it's like, well, which one is it, right? Like it feels weird that it's all of them. So lean into one. And it felt like he was just checking boxes like potential excuse, potential excuse, potential excuse. All right, I hit them all. That should be enough. I don't know. It didn't land great.
Yeah. There does seem to be a lot of mixed messages coming from him where I don't know exactly what he's doing. I think
that's the best way to put it.
His path forward isn't really clear. And I don't know if that's because he has a plan. He just doesn't want to be super forthright about it, or if he's just kind of shooting from the hip as well. But I guess time will tell. So we're kind of running short of time here, but I did want to ask you about a few first-time call-ups that were called into camp for the first time. There was 4 of them. Alex Freeman from Orlando City, Quinn Sullivan from the Philadelphia Union, Sebastian Berhalter from Vancouver Whitecaps, and Damian Downs from FC Cologne. How do you say that?
Both are right. Cologne is how you would say it in German. Cologne is how you would say it in English. So
okay, great. Right. So striker from Cologne. Those 4, which are you most excited to see get some playing time and see how they perform on the field?
I'm most excited to see the guy who's most deserved it is Sebastian Berhalter. I think he's been awesome. I think a lot of fans don't know about him, or if they do, don't know enough about him. He's been smashing success, especially in continental play. But he's earned it. I think a guy like Damian Downs, this just is not the right window for bringing in a player like this who's had, moderate success abroad, but is very young and does not seem like a guy who would be an option for the World Cup. And every time he goes into the game, I'm going to be like, why isn't this Josh Sargent, right? Somebody who's firing on all cylinders. Not to take anything away from Damian Downs. I think he's a prospect for the future, and I think he's somebody that should be called up at some point. But I think Sebastian Berhalter is the one that we should all be excited about. He's somebody that has looked this season like he can be someone who could contribute, right? And whether it be a squad position, a starting role, whatever. I always think back to the 2014 World Cup when Josie Altidore got injured and the team just couldn't cope, right? They didn't have the guy who can step in and take over that spot. And that's why every roster spot at the World Cup is important, and even the bench guys. And so you want someone who can make an impact if, God forbid, let's say Christian Pulisic does get injured, who can step into that role. And Berhalter has been really good in that 8-10 position, and I think it'll be exciting to see him play.
Yeah, he's the one I had picked out as well. I mean, because I'm curious to see can he perform at this level? Does what he's doing in MLS translate over to the international level? And then you just can't help but be interested in the storyline of his dad is fired from coach of the USMNT, and then what if he potentially makes the World Cup? If I would have told you 2 years ago that there'd be one Berhalter at the World Cup, but it wouldn't be Greg, would you have believed me? Because Sebastian, he really did come out of nowhere. He wasn't a player that I feel like anybody talked about before the MLS season as being close to making the U.S. men's national team. So you just can't help but be interested from the storyline from that perspective. One other thing I'll mention about the roster that I was really excited about was seeing the return of Fuller and Balogun and Serginho Dest after they've been injured. Neither of them have been into a camp with Pochettino, and so I'm really curious to see them back on the field. I'm especially excited to see how Pochettino utilizes Serginho Dest, where he puts him, what he has him doing on the field. Any quick thoughts on those two?
Yeah, you can add Malik Tillman to that mix too. I think he's coming back from a long-term injury and would be exciting to watch. I think I'm excited to watch all three of them for different reasons, right? Like, this team has missed Dest significantly, and I think you bring up a good point. Where will Pochettino play and how will he play him is fascinating to think about, and there's a number of possibilities. Balogun needs to perform. This guy has got to get going because he's not really put it together with the U.S. national team, and he had a really rough season with Monaco. So he has got to get going. This is a critically important window for Fuller and Balogun. And then Tillman has had a sensational season until he got hurt, and it's a player that this team could really use, right? Goal scoring creation has been an issue for this team, for anyone not named Christian Pulisic, and that's been the big problem, is that teams key on Pulisic and kick him and double team him, and no one else can provide a danger to either punish teams for doing that or pull the heat off Christian. So Tillman playing well, I think, would provide a real boost in that regard, and he's a guy who I think could start at the World Cup if certain things happen. So I'm really intrigued to see how Pochettino uses him and where he plays him and how he plays. So all three of those guys, I think, will be a really a big talking point, maybe the talking point for this camp and this Gold Cup.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Tillman, because I agree. He has a chance to really cement his place and stand out in this camp. I think it is, like you said, very, very critical for Balogun to have a good camp. I think if he was coming into a window where there was only 2 matches, his playing time might be limited from what I've seen, how Pochettino utilizes players that are kind of new into camp. But with this camp potentially being 8 matches, if you count 2 friendlies, and if the U.S. was to make it all the way to the final of the Gold Cup, which I know is a stretch at this point, but you got to think they're going to play 6 to 8 matches in this window, no matter what. And I feel like in that time, he should be able to work himself gradually into, if he can't work himself into becoming the starting striker, in this lineup by the end of this camp, I think we have a serious problem, and then I start to be concerned about him going forward at all.
And then the question becomes, then who, right?
Yeah.
There's problems with everybody else behind him, which is why, to me, it's so frustrating that Sargent isn't called in, because he needs time in the event that Balogun isn't the guy. He would be the next one, but now he's not here, so okay, maybe he's out of the fold. Then you've got Ajamang. Yeah, he's playing in MLS and has had a couple good appearances, but still you don't really feel confident about that. Vasquez, Downs is brand new. There's Haji Wright hasn't been here for a while. The options just aren't great, and they see Wright as a winger going back to the Berhalter days. At least Berhalter and I think Matt Crocker may have even said that. So who's after him if it doesn't work? And that's why these decisions are so frustrating.
Well, I still think Ricardo Pepi is in the pole position if he.
But what
if he comes back
happens
from
to him coming back? He's had a serious injury.
You don't know. Yeah, you don't know. But I'm assuming a lot that he's going to come back and be just fine. But I I mean, this it's so critical for Balogun to have a good camp here. All right, well, let's call it a show, Kyle. I will make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is at @the_bonfire, and also to your work at The Sporting News. Thanks as always for coming on the show and being so passionate. I appreciate it.
You know, it's I think hopefully it reflects the fans, because this is the most important year in the national team's history. From now until the end of the World Cup. Yeah. There's never been a more important year in a vacuum than right now. And that's always the case, right? Like, the next year is the most important year. But if you look at the history of the U.S. national team, coming up to a World Cup on home soil with the best, the most talented roster or player pool that they've ever had is the most important year in the national team's history. If they don't put it together now, then what? Becomes a huge question. And so that's why these decisions are so important. And when it feels like, right, I'm not saying that this is the case, but when it is received, when the messages are received that decisions are being made on a whim or flippantly, it can be frustrating.
Yeah, I fully agree with you that this being the most important year this national team's ever had, and I'm telling you, the pressure is on for this Gold Cup. I don't care that this isn't the quote-unquote A team. If things do not go well, I mean, it's going to hit the fan, and this fan base is going to go nuts, and Pochettino is going to be under some serious fire. Which let's hope that we don't get to that point. Let's hope it goes well, but we will see. Thanks everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.